was
All
on
right,
fire.
boys, let's move!
That was
Copy
the
that!
first thing you needed to
Keep it
understand.
tight,
Not the heat,
formation!
the screaming, not the smell of gasoline soaking
got
through
you.
the
Hold
back of
on.
a
What's
16-year-old
happening?
girl's hoodie
Just hold on to me.
as she
We're
pressed
getting out of
herself
here.
flat against the burning asphalt of Interstate 15. The fire. Because fire doesn't negotiate. Fire doesn't care about warrants or foster files or the fact that nobody in the world knew where Remy Cole was or whether she was alive. Fire just moves forward. And so did she. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. 6 hours before the van came down, Remy Cole was nobody. That was not self-pity. That was a statement of operational fact, the kind of clear-eyed assessment that keeps a person alive when sentimentality would get them killed. She was 16 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, and weighed 109 pounds in her shoes. She had $19 folded into the inner sole of her left Converse. She had a warrant out of Sacramento County for unlawful flight from foster care. She had a pocket knife with a cracked handle that she kept in her front right pocket blade facing up always. And she had a plan. The plan was Las Vegas. Not because Las Vegas was a good place for a 16-year-old girl traveling alone. It was not. Remy knew that. She had been in enough group homes and enough waiting rooms and enough back seats of social workers' cars to know exactly what the world did to girls like her when they stopped being careful. But Las Vegas was 300 miles from Sacramento, which meant 300 miles from Dale Pruitt's house on Oleander Street, and 300 miles was the only unit of measurement that mattered right now. She had been walking the gravel shoulder of Interstate 15 for 4 hours. The Mojave in July does not care about human endurance. The heat comes off the asphalt in visible waves, the kind of shimmer that makes the road ahead look like it is slowly dissolving into the sky. The temperature had been 108 degrees at noon. It was past 3 in the afternoon now, and it had not dropped. Remy's hoodie, a gray, oversized thing, 2 sizes too big, that she wore like armor, was soaked through at the back and collar. She kept it on anyway. The sleeves covered her forearms. The sleeves were important. She had been in the foster system for 10 years. 6 years old when the state of California took custody of her a week after her mother, Donna Cole, was found unresponsive in the bathroom of a Fresno motel room. Remy remembered that night with the particular clarity that trauma reserves for its most important lessons. She remembered the green carpet in the motel hallway. She remembered the paramedics' radio crackling. She remembered pressing her face against the door frame of the bathroom and saying 4 words, "Please don't leave me." Her mother had not answered. Nobody had answered. A woman in a county lanyard had come and taken Remy's hand and walked her out to a car that smelled like fast food and industrial cleaner. And that was the end of one chapter and the beginning of something considerably worse. 7 foster families in 10 years. She had counted them once, lying on a cot in a group home in Bakersfield, staring at a water-stained ceiling tile. 7 families, none of whom had kept her longer than 18 months. She did not blame most of them, not really, not anymore. Fostering was hard. The stipend was small. The kids came broken in ways the orientation training did not fully prepare you for. She understood the economics of it. What she did not forgive was Dale Pruitt. Dale Pruitt was the 7th family. He was 51 years old, a former Army logistics sergeant, 2 tours in the Middle East, honorably discharged in 2009 with a service commendation and a drinking problem that the VA had been managing unsuccessfully for 15 years. He lived in a 2-bedroom house on Oleander Street in Sacramento with a guest room he had converted into a foster bedroom, complete with a twin mattress, a chest of drawers, and a deadbolt on the outside of the door. The deadbolt was the first thing Remy noticed when the social worker brought her in September of 2010 when she was 14. She did not say anything about it. She had learned by then that saying things out loud had consequences, and that consequences in houses like this one were delivered in ways that left marks in places clothing could cover. Dale Pruitt was not a monster in the way movies portray monsters. He did not cackle. He was not dramatic about it. He was methodical. He was worse when he drank, which was most nights, and on the nights he did not drink. He was merely cold, the kind of cold that is its own form of violence. He had rules. The rules were arbitrary, and they changed without notice, and the punishment for breaking them was always physical and always carefully placed. Remy learned the geography of his moods the way you learn the geography of a minefield. You do not learn it because you are brave. You learn it because you want to survive until tomorrow. She had been in his house for 2 years. In those 2 years, she had done the following things that nobody knew about. She had hidden $43 saved from the occasional $5 bill Dale left on the counter when he needed something from the corner store, adding the change to a growing reserve tucked inside the liner of her left shoe. She had memorized the bus routes from Sacramento to every major city within 400 miles. She had located a phone number written in pencil inside the back cover of a library book she had kept past its due date for a woman named Mrs. Alderman, who had been her 8th grade English teacher in Bakersfield and who had just once pulled Remy aside after class and asked very quietly if she was all right. Not in the way adults usually ask, the way they asked when they wanted you to say yes so they could move on. She asked it like she actually wanted to know the answer. Remy had said she was fine. She had never forgotten the question. The night she left, Dale came home at 11:15. She heard his truck in the driveway before his headlights swept across her ceiling, and she heard the particular heaviness of his boots on the porch steps that told her everything she needed to know about what kind of night this was. She was already dressed. Her backpack was already packed. It had been packed, unpacked, and repacked 14 times over the past 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment, which she had decided was not defined by opportunity, but by necessity. Necessity arrived at 11:22 when Dale opened the door to the guest room, and she saw in the thin yellow light from the hallway that he was holding his belt. Not the leather one, the other one. The wide one with the brass buckle that he had gotten somewhere in Germany during his first deployment, the one he kept on a specific hook by the bathroom door and never wore and never moved except on certain nights when the drinking had taken him past the usual place and into somewhere darker. Remy looked at the belt. She looked at Dale's face. She made a calculation. She went out the window. The screen was already loosened. She had done that 2 weeks ago with the cracked blade of her pocket knife, working at the corners for 20 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon while Dale was at the hardware store. She had replaced it carefully so it looked intact from the outside. She dropped 4 feet to the side yard, landed soft the way she had practiced in her head every night for 3 weeks. She did not run. Running makes noise. She walked fast and low along the fence line to the back alley, and then she walked 7 blocks to the bus station on Folsom Boulevard, and she bought a ticket to Barstow with 12 of her $43, and she did not look back at Sacramento once. That was 4 days ago. She had been moving south and east since then, hitching where she could, walking where she had to, sleeping in a truck stop outside of Barstow for one night and a church parking lot in Baker for another. She was down to $19. She had eaten a gas station hot dog for breakfast and nothing since. The water in her bottle had run out an hour ago, and the heat was serious now, the kind of heat that doesn't feel dangerous until you are already in trouble. She needed water. She needed shade. She needed 10 minutes off her feet. The gas station appeared on the horizon like a mirage that turned out to be real, a low white building with 2 pump islands and a hand-painted sign that said cold drinks in red letters that had faded to pink. Remy adjusted her backpack straps and aimed herself at it. She heard the motorcycles before she saw them. The sound came from the east, a low gathering rumble that built itself into something that vibrated in the chest before it registered in the ears. She turned and watched them come. 6 motorcycles, Harley-Davidsons, the big touring kind, heavy and chrome bright in the afternoon sun. They moved in a loose 2x2 formation that tightened up as they pulled into the station, and the riders brought them to stop with the particular ease of people who have been doing this for a very long time. Remy stopped walking. In the foster system, you develop threat assessment as a survival tool. You learn to read rooms before you enter them. You learn to read people before they speak. She stood at the edge of the lot and watched the 6 men dismount, and she cataloged what she saw with the automatic precision of someone who has had to be right about these things before. The patches on their leather vests told her the important part immediately. She knew the patch. Anyone who had spent time in certain California group homes knew the patch. The Death's Head, Hell's Angels. The bottom rocker said San Bernardino. She moved to the side of the building. There was a dumpster at the back corner, set back from the wall in a narrow strip of shade that fell between the building and the fence. It was not pleasant shade. It smelled of old fryer oil and something sweet and rotten underneath. But it was shade, and it was out of sight of the pump islands, and Remy sat down against the wall with her backpack in her lap and her knees pulled up, and she let herself rest. She could hear them from here. The clunk of fuel nozzles, the low murmur of men talking, and the shorthand of people who have known each other for years. She was not trying to listen. She was trying to be invisible, which was a skill she had developed to a high level of proficiency. She watched through the gap between the dumpster and the fence. The leader was obvious. He was the largest man she had seen in some time, somewhere north of 50, with a gray streaked beard that reached his chest and forearms, that looked like they belonged on someone who had spent 40 years doing something that required forearms like that. He moved with the unhurried authority of a man who had not been in a hurry since approximately 1987. His vest had more patches than the others. On the front, above the breast pocket, a patch said Walt. Below the breast pocket, a smaller patch said The Ox. She could have guessed the nickname from looking at him. Walt was fueling up at pump 4. He was not talking to the others. He was looking at something clipped to the inside of his windshield, a photograph, the square kind that comes from a real camera, not a phone. He looked at it for a long moment while the pump ran. His expression did not change exactly, but something around his eyes did something that Remy, who had spent years reading the faces of adults for any sign of what was coming, recognized with a small shock of unfamiliarity. It was love. Uncomplicated, unguarded, unreserved. The way a person looks when they believe nobody is watching. The photograph was of a young woman college age with blonde hair and her father's square jaw and the look of someone who had grown up with enough safety in her life to be capable of genuine undefended happiness. Remy looked at the photograph and then looked away. There was a feeling she did not have a clean name for something in the neighborhood of hunger, but not for food. She had seen fathers look at daughters before on television in other people's houses when she was small, and the brief and occasional glimpses of normal life that the foster system permits before it moves you along. She knew what it looked like from the outside. She had never had occasion to experience what it felt like from the inside. She looked at the ground between her feet. She didn't hear him approach. That was unusual. Remy was attentive to footsteps the way some people are attentive to weather. But the sound of the pump and the heat, and maybe the 4 days of not sleeping right, had blunted her edge. And when she looked up, he was already there 3 feet away, the big man with the gray beard not looking at her. He was looking at the fence. He held a bottle of water and a packet of peanut butter crackers in one hand, and he set them on top of the dumpster with the particular deliberateness of a man placing something exactly where he intends to place it. He did not look at her. He turned and walked back to the pump island. Remy looked at the water and the crackers. She looked at the back of the man walking away. She looked at the water again. After a moment, she reached up and took them both. She did not understand in that moment what had just happened. She understood the transaction on its surface. A man had seen a kid who needed water and had provided water. The subsurface of it, what it meant, that he had seen her without making her visible, that he had given without requiring anything in return, that he had walked away without waiting to be thanked. That was something she would not understand until later, sitting in a hospital room with her wrist cuffed to a bed rail and the same man sitting in the corner in a plastic chair that was too small for him. She drank the water in 3 long pulls. She ate 4 of the crackers. She put the rest in her backpack. She listened to the bikes start up one by one and the sound of them pulling out of the lot and back onto the highway heading east. She waited until the sound faded to nothing. Then she stood, adjusted her backpack, and started walking again. She did not know that in 40 minutes she would be under a burning van. She did not know that the man in the photograph, the man with the gray beard and the unhurried authority, was about to discover exactly how fragile the thing he loved most was. She did not know that the 6 motorcycles pulling east on Interstate 15 were being followed at a comfortable distance by a small red Honda with the windows down and the radio up, driven by a 19-year-old girl with blonde hair who was singing along to something her father would have pretended to hate. She just walked. The shoulder of Interstate 15 is not designed for pedestrians. It is a thin strip of gravel and broken glass and the shed remnants of truck tires, and it runs alongside 4 lanes of traffic moving at 75 miles per hour with the aggressive confidence of people who have somewhere to be. Remy walked facing traffic the way she had been taught in a school she barely remembered, and she kept her eyes up and her pace steady, and she watched the cars, and she thought about Las Vegas, and she did not think about Dale Pruitt or Oleander Street or the belt with the brass buckle or the 4 words she had said to her mother 17 years ago and the silence that had come back. She was 2 miles east of the gas station when the traffic slowed. It didn't slow the way traffic slows for a speed trap or a construction zone. A gradual compression, cars tapping brakes, speed dropping incrementally over a quarter mile. This was sudden. The brake lights came on all at once, 200 yards ahead, and the line of cars stopped as if it had run into a wall. Then she heard it. The sound of a significant impact carries differently from the sound of ordinary traffic. It is not louder exactly, it is more like the sound is denser, heavier, more present in the air. There is a bass quality to it that registers in the body before the brain processes it as something meaningful. Remy heard it and stopped walking before she understood why she had stopped. Then she smelled the gasoline. She ran. She was not thinking about the police or the warrant. She was not thinking about Dale Pruitt or Sacramento or anything else except the smell of fuel and the stopped traffic and the column of gray-white smoke that was already rising from somewhere ahead. She dropped her backpack on the gravel shoulder without deciding to just let it fall, and she ran on the shoulder past the stopped cars, past the people standing beside their open doors with their phones out, and she came around a slow-moving pickup truck and saw what had happened. The landscaping van had been white, originally a Ford Transit heavy-gauge work vehicle loaded with equipment. It had blown a rear tire that was visible even from where she stood, a catastrophic blowout that had sent the van across the median and into the path of a semi that had clipped its rear quarter. The impact had sent the van into a lateral roll, and it had come down on its side, and the side it had come down on was the driver's side of a small red Honda Civic that had been in the inside lane. The Honda was almost gone. The van's roof rack and heavy rear frame had come down on the Honda's roof and driver's side with the full weight of 3 tons of steel and equipment, and the roof of the small car had been pressed down to the level of the door handles. The driver's side was a compressed maze of crumpled metal. The passenger side was slightly less destroyed. There was a thin opening at the driver's window, maybe 8 inches of clear space between the collapsed door frame and the compressed roof. From inside that 8 inches of space, a voice was calling for help. It was thin and terrified, and it was using up air that the person inside could not afford to waste. Remy looked at the crowd, 40, maybe 50 people, standing in a rough semicircle around the wreck, phones up filming, some calling 911, all of them holding a distance of 20, 30 feet from the car, because the gasoline was visible now, a spreading dark stain across the hot asphalt that shimmered in the heat, and everyone with working olfactory nerves could smell it, and everyone with working common sense understood what it meant. Nobody was moving toward the car. Remy looked at the Honda. She looked at the gay. She looked at the thin opening at the driver's window. She got down on her stomach and crawled toward it. The asphalt was scorching through her hoodie and jeans. The gasoline reached her before she reached the car, soaking into the fabric at her knees and elbows, the smell so overpowering that her eyes began to water immediately. She kept going. The broken glass from the driver's window had scattered across the road, and she crawled through it and felt it open her palms in a dozen small places, and she kept going. She got her head and shoulders through the window opening. The space inside was barely a space at all. The roof of the car had come down at an angle higher on the passenger side, lower on the driver's side, and the driver was pinned at her chest and legs. She was conscious. Her eyes were open, and they found Remy's face immediately, and they were wide with the kind of terror that is specific to people who believe they are about to die and are unable to prevent it. She was about 19 years old, blonde hair matted with blood from a cut on her forehead, square jaw, her father's face. Remy recognized her from the photograph. She was Walt's daughter. The understanding arrived in Remy's mind with a clarity that was almost hallucinatory. This was the girl in the picture. This was the person that large quiet man had looked at with unguarded love at Pump 440 minutes ago and 3 miles west of here. This was his daughter, and she was trapped under a burning van, and the gasoline spreading under Remy's body right now was going to make that a moot point in a very short time. "Hey!" Remy's voice came out steadier than she expected. "Hey, look at me." The girl's eyes focused. They were blue and they were full of panic, and they settled on Remy's face like a drowning person settles on a fixed point. "I can't breathe." The girl's voice was barely audible. Her chest was pinned. Every word cost her. My dad is back there somewhere." "Don't talk," Remy said. "Save your air." She was assessing as she spoke the way Dale's house had trained her to assess the quick triage of a situation to identify what was real and what was manageable. The van above them was resting at an unstable angle. The rear of it had come down on the car's roof, and the weight distribution was on the whole mass leaning slightly toward the driver's side, which meant any significant movement could cause it to drop further. The roof of the Honda had compressed enough to pin the girl's chest, but had stopped short of her face, which meant she was getting air barely in shallow sips that were not going to sustain her for long if she panicked and started pulling in the wrong direction. The fire was in the van's engine block. Remy could see the first thin tendrils of smoke rising from the front of the van, which was 6 feet away. The gasoline pooling under the car was not yet connected to the fire. Not yet. "What's your name?" Remy said. "Sadie." Her voice was a thread. "Sadie, I'm Remy. I'm staying right here. You have to go." Sadie's eyes were wet. "It's going to explode." "It's not going to explode," Remy said. This was not necessarily true. She kept her voice flat and certain. "I can hear the ambulance already." She could not hear an ambulance. She could hear traffic. She could hear people shouting behind her. She could hear the structural groan of the van above them, a low metallic complaint that happened every 30 seconds or so, and each time made her stomach clench. She reached through the broken window and found Sadie's hand in the wreckage and held it. Sadie's grip was the grip of someone who understood perfectly that this was the only anchor she had. Behind them out on the road, the sirens began. Remy heard them and felt a familiar cold clench in her gut. Police sirens on Interstate 15 in Nevada meant Nevada Highway Patrol, which meant they would run plates. They would run IDs. They would find the Sacramento warrant in approximately 45 seconds once they had her name. She turned her head and looked out across the open desert to her right. 400 yards of nothing, and then a low ridge, and then more nothing. She knew that terrain. She had walked through worse. She looked at Sadie. Sadie was staring at her. The blue eyes were doing something complicated. They were not just afraid. They were asking. Not asking for rescue exactly. Asking for something more specific and more basic than that. "Please don't leave me." She had not said it out loud. She did not need to. Remy had seen that look before. She had worn that look before. She had worn it in the doorway of a motel bathroom at 6 years old, and nobody had stayed, and she had been learning ever since what it felt like to be the person who got left. She turned away from the desert. "I'm staying right here, Sadie," she said. She wedged herself deeper into the gap between the asphalt and the car door, getting more of her body under the wreck, getting her shoulder against the door frame to put pressure against the van's weight from below. It was not going to work. She was 109 pounds, and the van weighed 3 tons, and the physics of this were not going to bend to willpower. But the position gave her leverage to maintain the gap, to keep the door frame from closing further, to buy the inches of space that Sadie needed to keep breathing. The van groaned again. It dropped an inch. Sadie cried out a short, involuntary sound. "Stop," Remy said. "Stop moving. Stop bracing. Let your body go soft. If you push against it, you give it something to push back on." Sadie went still. Her breathing was labored and shallow and wrong, but it was there. "Tell me about school," Remy said. "What are you studying?" She was not interested in the answer. She needed Sadie's brain occupied with something other than the weight on her chest and the smell of gasoline and the smoke that was thickening above them. She needed her not to panic, because panic would make Sadie move, and movement would shift the van, and at this point, a 3-inch shift in the wrong direction would end this. "Business," Sadie managed. "University of Arizona, junior year." "Are you good at it?" "Dad thinks so." "What do you think?" A pause. A labored breath. "I think I want to open a restaurant." "Then you will," Remy said. The shadow fell across them before the sound arrived. Or rather, the sound had been building for a moment, and Remy had registered it as part of the ambient noise of the highway without isolating it, and then it separated itself from everything else and became what it was. Motorcycles. Multiple motorcycles moving fast, coming from the direction of the gas station. Remy turned her head sideways against the asphalt and looked back through the gap under the van. She saw them coming down the median, 6 bikes bypassing the stopped traffic, entirely kicking up dust and gravel, moving with the urgency of people who had seen the smoke from far enough away that they had spent the last 3 miles deciding what to do about it. They braked hard and came to a stop 15 yards from the wreck. The riders were off the bikes before the kickstands were down. And then she heard it. The voice that cut through everything else, not loud the way shouting is loud, but present the way where a wall is present, something you cannot walk through. Sadie. It was Walt. He had seen the Honda before he finished saying the name. He crossed the distance between his bike and the car in the time it takes to draw a breath, and he came down to his knees on the gasoline-soaked asphalt beside the driver's side, and his face, which Remy could now see in the gap, was the face of a man for whom the entire content of the world had just compressed into a space 8 inches wide. He saw his daughter. He saw the girl holding his daughter's hand. He reached for the girl. "Dad!" Sadie's voice was urgent and thin. "Don't. She's holding me. She's the reason the roof hasn't come down." Walt stopped. His hand was 6 inches from Remy's shoulder. He looked at Remy, really looked the kind of looking that is actually seeing, and what he saw was this bloody palms. A shoulder jammed against a car door that weighed 400 pounds of crumpled steel. Eyes that were afraid but not panicking. A 16-year-old girl in a gasoline-soaked hoodie who had gotten under a burning van for a stranger and was not leaving. He pulled his hand back. "She's pinned at the chest," Remy said. Her voice was steady. "The van is shifting left. If we move the car, the van drops. If we push the van, it rolls." Walt looked up at the 3 tons of steel above them. He took in the angle, the weight distribution, the smoke that was now coming in a continuous stream from the engine block. He stood. He looked at his 5 men. "Crow, get the fire extinguisher, both of them. Hank, get on the far side, find me the frame rail. Slag, get the chains." The men moved. They moved with the efficiency of people who know each other's capabilities and trust them without discussion. And there was no wasted motion, and no panic, and no argument, and Remy, watching from her position under the van, thought that whatever else these men were, they were not people who fell apart. The police arrived in the middle of it, 2 Nevada Highway Patrol cruisers, lights on, pulling onto the shoulder. 2 officers out of hands, not on weapons, but close to them, moving fast toward the scene, and then slowing as they processed what they were looking at. 6 bikers with Hell's Angels patches swarming a crash site, chains in hand, and a girl halfway under a van. "Back away from the vehicle." The officer's voice through a loudspeaker was flat and commanding. "Back away and let the professionals handle this." Walt turned from what he was doing and looked at the officer. "My daughter is under there," he said. His voice was quiet. "We aren't going anywhere." The 2 officers looked at each other. Above the wreck, the smoke changed color. It went from gray-white to black. Remy felt it before she saw it. A change in the temperature of the air above her, a degree or two. A slight increase that in other circumstances would be negligible, but in this context was a countdown. The fire in the engine block had found something new to eat. "We need to move now," Remy said. She said it without turning her head and without raising her voice, but something in the quality of it made everyone within earshot stop. Walt crouched back down to the level of the window. "The chains," he said. "Tell me," Remy said. "The bikes. We hook the chains to the van's rear axle and pull it sideways, off the car. If we do it slow and steady, the roof comes up when the weight goes." "If you do it wrong," Remy said. "If we do it wrong," he said, "the van rolls and it comes down harder." Remy looked at Sadie. Sadie was watching her father. There was something in her face that was not just fear and not just pain. It was trust, the absolute non-negotiable trust of a person who has been given consistent reason for it over 19 years of being known and loved by someone. Remy had never had that. She recognized it anyway. "Tell Sadie," Remy said. "She should hear it from you." Walt moved so his face was in the window opening. "Sadie," he said, "baby, we're going to pull the van off. It's going to be loud and it might shake. You stay still and you stay with this girl, you hear me?" "I hear you, Dad. Don't let go of her hand. I won't." Walt stood. He looked at the officer who had shouted through the loudspeaker and was now standing 10 feet away undecided. "Get on that radio and get a medevac in the air. We've got an interior fire and 2 people trapped." The officer looked at him for a moment and then walked back to his cruiser without saying anything. Walt turned to his men. "Hook it to the rear axle. Double the chains. On my count. Slow and steady. We drag it. We do not yank it." Remy lay flat and held Sadie's hand and waited. Above her, the van groaned. The smoke was thick now, and the heat was radiating in a way that was no longer background. She could feel it on the back of her neck. She could feel it through the metal above her. "Sadie," she said, "I'm here." "After this," Remy said, and then stopped. She did not know what she had been about to say. It was not the time for it, and this was not the place, and she might not be in a position to finish any sentence she started in the next 60 seconds. She looked at Sadie's face in the compressed dark of the wreck, and she thought about the man outside who had left a bottle of water on a dumpster without looking at her, and she thought about a motel room in Fresno, and she thought about 4 words spoken into silence, and she thought, not this time. "You're going to be okay," Remy said. The chains went taut with a sound like a guitar string being tuned up past its limit, a rising metallic whine that vibrated the frame of the car. Remy pressed herself as low as she could. She felt Sadie's hand tighten. On my count, Walt's voice came from somewhere above and behind. 1. The chains lifted off the ground, stiff as iron bars. 2. The van shuddered. The metal above Remy's head shifted with a sound like something tearing. 3. Pull. 6 throttles opened wide simultaneously. The sound was beyond loud. It was inside the body, inside the chest, inside the bones. The rear tires of 6 Harley-Davidson motorcycles bit into the asphalt of Interstate 15, and the smoke poured off them and mixed with the black smoke of the burning van. And for 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the van moved. It did not lift. It slid. Slowly at first, grinding across the pavement with a sound like the world coming apart. And then with gathering momentum as the friction broke and the 3 tons of steel began to move sideways away from the crushed Honda, dragged by 6 engines, and the absolute refusal of 6 men to accept the alternative. The pressure on the car roof vanished. It happened in a fraction of a second. One moment the weight was there, the full suffocating presence of it, and then it was gone and the compressed roof of the Honda sprang upward by 2 inches, which was enough. Which was exactly enough. Remy heard Walt's voice, "Get them out, now." She heard running footsteps. She heard the driver's door being torn off its hinges, the fatigued metal giving way with a sound like a gunshot. She heard Walt's voice change into something that was not a leader's voice at all, something much older and rawer than that, saying Sadie, saying baby girl, saying I've got you, saying it over and over. She was trying to crawl out, and her arms were not working the way they should. The shoulder that had been pressed against the doorframe had taken something from the van's shifting weight, something hot and wrong, and her left arm was not accepting instructions from her nervous system with any reliability. She was pushing with her legs and pulling with her right arm and making progress by the inch. A hand found her wrist. A different hand, not Walt's. She looked up. One of the officers, young dust on his uniform, kneeling in the gasoline with his hand around her arm. "Come on," he said. "Come on, come on, come on." She came out of the wreck the way something being born comes out slowly, and then all at once, and then she was on the open asphalt of the highway in the full heat of the Nevada sun, and the world was very loud and very bright, and her left arm was wrong in a way she was going to have to deal with later. She looked back at the van. The fuel line gave. The sound was enormous. The heat that came off the fireball was physical, a solid wall of it that pushed everyone back 3 steps involuntarily, the officer with his arm around Remy Walt, with Sadie cradled against his chest, all of them recoiling from the heat of the thing that had just consumed the space they had been standing in 30 seconds before. The asphalt where Remy had been lying was on fire. She stood on the highway shoulder and looked at the burning van and felt the heat on her face and breathed the thick black smoke and thought about nothing at all for a moment. Just breathed, just existed, just was present in the specific, irreducible fact of being alive. Then her legs stopped working. She did not fall dramatically. She just went down the knees first and then the hands onto the hot asphalt. And the paramedics who had arrived in the last 60 seconds were there immediately, voices and hands in the cold shock of a stethoscope. And she heard someone say something about pulse and something about the shoulder and something about the burns on her forearms where the hoodie had ridden up, and she did not process any of it with any clarity. What she processed was this. 20 feet away, Walt Briggs was on his knees on the asphalt holding his daughter, and Sadie was alive and talking, and her arms were around her father's neck. And this man who had walked through this world for 50-some years looking like something carved out of granite was holding his daughter and shaking. Not with anger, not with relief exactly. With something that did not have a name in any language Remy knew, but that she recognized in the marrow of her bones as the thing she had been looking for since she was 6 years old in a motel hallway saying, "Please don't leave me," into a silence that never answered. The paramedic cut her hoodie open from the back. She felt the air on the scars, the old ones, the ones that lived between her shoulder blades and down along her lower back, where the brass buckle had found her on the worst nights and on certain other nights that she had stopped trying to count. She felt the air, and she felt the pause that came over the paramedic working on her, the slight hesitation that she had felt before from nurses in emergency rooms, from a gym teacher in Bakersfield, from anyone who had ever seen what Dale Pruitt's house had done to her back. She did not look around, but 20 feet away, Walt Briggs looked up from his daughter. His eyes moved to Remy, to the paramedic's face, to what the paramedic was looking at. He went very still. He looked for a long time. He said nothing. He turned his face away toward the burning van, toward the desert, toward the blank Nevada sky. Slab was standing next to him. He had seen it too. Slab had been riding with Walt Briggs for 22 years. He had seen Walt in bar fights, in courtrooms, and hospital waiting rooms. He had seen him bury his wife. He had seen him the night Sadie had been in a car accident at 17, a minor one. Everybody fine, and Walt had not slept for 30 hours straight. He had never in 22 years seen Walt Briggs turn his face away from anything. He turned his face away now, and Remy Cole lay on the asphalt of Interstate 15 while the van burned behind her and the paramedics worked and the police radios crackled and the sky above Nevada was absolutely mercilessly blue, and she stared up at it and thought, oh, I did not run. She did not know yet what that would cost her. She did not know about the warrant being run through the Nevada system in the next 20 minutes, or the call going to Sacramento, or Dale Pruitt already picking up the phone. She did not know about the handcuff that was going to be attached to her wrist in the recovery room of St. Catherine's Hospital in Las Vegas in 4 hours. She did not know about any of it. She just knew that she had stayed, that for the first time in her life she had been the person who stayed. And Sadie Briggs was alive and breathing in her father's arms 50 feet away because of it. The sky was very blue. The pain in her shoulder was enormous and getting larger. She closed her eyes. She came back to consciousness in stages. First the sound, the rhythmic electronic pulse of a cardiac monitor, steady and indifferent, measuring out the seconds with mechanical patience. Then the smell, antiseptic and recirculated air. And underneath both of those things, very faint, the ghost of gasoline that had soaked so deeply into her skin that a single shower was not going to reach it. Then the light, fluorescent and flat, in the particular shade of white that exists only in hospitals, in interrogation rooms, light designed not to comfort, but to illuminate. Then the weight on her wrist. She did not open her eyes immediately. She lay still and breathed and assessed the situation the way she always assessed situations from the inside out, before showing any external sign of awareness. Her left shoulder was immobilized, bound tightly against her body. Her palms were bandaged. Her back ached in a way that was different from the familiar ache of old scar tissue, sharper and more recent, the burns from the asphalt working their way through the first layer of numbness that adrenaline provides. And her right wrist was connected to the bed rail by a standard law enforcement handcuff, the hinged kind locked down to the second notch. She opened her eyes. The room was small and pale green, and the single window showed a rectangle of black Nevada sky going dark blue at its lower edge, which meant it was somewhere around 4 in the morning. She had been unconscious for roughly 12 hours. An IV ran into her right forearm. The cardiac monitor was hers. The handcuff was also hers. She turned her head. He was sitting in the corner. Walt Briggs occupied the plastic hospital chair the way a cathedral occupies a city block, with complete authority and no apparent awareness of the incongruity. He was still in his riding clothes, the leather vest, the worn jeans, the boots that had walked across the asphalt toward a burning car without slowing down. He had washed his hands. She could see that the grease was gone from the creases of his knuckles. But the blood was still under his fingernails, dark and dried, and she understood without being told that some of it was hers and some of it was Sadie's, and that he had not wanted to scrub it away entirely, as if removing it completely would be a kind of erasure of something he needed to keep. He was not asleep. His eyes were open and they were on her face. They looked at each other for a moment without speaking. She had been looked at by a lot of adults in her 16 years. She had been looked at with pity, which she hated. She had been looked at with the clinical detachment of social workers and intake coordinators processing a file. She had been looked at with the specific assessing gaze of people trying to determine how much trouble she was going to be. She had been looked at by Dale Pruitt in ways she did not catalog or revisit. Walt Briggs looked at her the way you look at something you have been afraid of losing. "My daughter is alive," he said. His voice was low and unhurried. His voice was always low and unhurried. She was already learning that this was not calm exactly. It was the quality of a man who had decided long ago that most things worth saying did not require volume. Remy said nothing. Sadie's in surgery. Broken femur, 3 fractured ribs, collapsed lung. They say she'll walk again. They say she'll be fine. He paused. Because of you. Remy looked at the handcuff. She pulled at it once lightly, hearing the metal click against the rail. It was a habitual gesture, the kind you make not because you expect a different result, but because the restraint requires acknowledgement. "How long?" she said. He understood the question. "The detective was here 2 hours ago. Your name is Remy Cole, 16 years old, runaway out of the California foster system. Active warrant out of Sacramento County." He paused. "And Dale Pruitt has already been notified." The name landed the way it always landed, like something dropping onto a hard floor. Remy kept her face even. She was practiced at keeping her face even when she heard that name. "He's flying in from Sacramento," Walt said. "The state wants to release you to his custody once you're medically cleared. CPS agent named Halkett is coming in from California in the morning with a transport order." Remy turned her head and looked at the window. The black sky had gone a shade bluer. She calculated. 4 hours, maybe 5 before dawn, before Halkett. She looked at the IV in her arm and the bandages on her hands and the immobilized shoulder and made the same calculation she always made when the walls were coming in, the calculation about whether there was a way out and what it would cost. Walt watched her do it. "I know what you're thinking," he said. She looked at him. "You're thinking about exits." He said it without judgment, the way you state a weather condition. "You're looking at that window and calculating whether a one-armed 16-year-old with an IV in her arm can make it to the desert before a hospital security guard catches her." She said nothing. "I was 11 years old," Walt said, "when I sat behind a dumpster at a gas station in Flagstaff, Arizona, and figured out which direction to run if the man who came out of the station turned out to be a problem." The room was very quiet. "I left the water because I recognized you," he said. "Not your face, just you. The way you were sitting, the way your eyes went to the exits before they went anywhere else." He leaned forward in the chair, his elbows on his knees, and looked at her with the directness of someone who has given up on indirection as a waste of time. "I know what those scars are from. The paramedic's face told me before I saw them. And I've been sitting in this chair for 6 hours trying to figure out how to tell you that I'm not going to let them send you back." Remy looked at him for a longer moment. "You're a biker," she said. Her voice was flat, not disrespectful, factual. "They're the state of California. You don't have a play here." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a man who has heard the word impossible deployed by people who underestimated the variables. He reached into the breast pocket of his vest and pulled out something small and held it where she could see it. A patch, diamond-shaped, the kind that goes on the front of a cut, not the back. Inside the diamond, 2 words, "Prospect." She looked at it. "I'm a girl," she said. He set it on the bed rail next to the handcuff. "Patch doesn't ask," he said. He stood. He was very large in the small room. He walked to the door and opened it. 2 Nevada Highway Patrol officers were standing in the corridor outside, posted to ensure the fugitive did not depart. Walt looked at them for a moment. "She needs rest," he said. "Keep it down." He walked past them down the corridor without waiting for a response. Remy lay in the hospital bed and looked at the patch on the bed rail and listened to the cardiac monitor count out her heartbeat and thought about Dale Pruitt on an airplane and Agent Halkett with a transport order and the desert outside the window that was slowly going from black to the deep blue of very early morning. She did not sleep. Outside in the parking lot of St. Catherine's Hospital in Las Vegas, Nevada, a phone call was being made. Walt stood in the center of the lot beside his Road King and held his phone to his ear. The parking lot held 11 motorcycles. Word had traveled the way it always traveled in the club, fast and without ceremony, and by the time Walt had come back downstairs, 6 of the San Bernardino charter had ridden in from wherever they had been when the call went out, and Slab had made his own calls, and by 11 at night there were 11 bikes and their riders standing in a hospital parking lot because Walt Briggs had put the word out, and when Walt Briggs put the word out, people answered. He was not calling the club now. He was calling Hank Dower, who was not a biker, but who had been doing investigative work for the club since 1998, and who had the particular skill set of a man who had spent 8 years as a county sheriff's investigator before a disagreement with his supervisor about the allocation of seized assets had ended his law enforcement career and begun his second one. Hank Walt said, "I need everything you can find on a man named Dale Pruitt, Sacramento, foster care provider, by morning." He listened. Everything, Walt said. Bank records if you can get them, especially bank records. He hung up. He looked at the hospital entrance. He looked at the 11 men standing around their bikes in the parking lot. "Make the calls," he said to Slab, "not just the charter. Coalition. Anyone who can ride." Slab looked at him. How wide Walt thought about a 16-year-old girl lying in a hospital bed with her wrist handcuffed to a rail and a government transport order coming in the morning to return her to the man whose belt buckle had written itself across her back in scar tissue. All of it, Walt said. Everyone. Hank Dower called back at 2:47 in the morning. Walt was back in the chair in room 314. Remy was asleep, finally the shallow, vigilant sleep of someone who has trained themselves not to go under too deep. Her right hand, the uninjured one, was curled loosely around the bed rail near the handcuff, a habitual gesture, a sleeper's instinct to keep track of the restraint, even in unconsciousness. Walt stepped into the corridor to take the call. Hank talked for 4 minutes. Walt listened. When Hank finished, there was a silence on the line. "He's still collecting?" Walt said. It was not a question. Every month, Hank said, $1,460. Foster care stipend from the state of California. Direct deposit to a checking account at a Sacramento credit union. He paused. The last deposit was 8 days ago, 3 weeks after she ran. Walt looked at the closed door of room 314. "Nobody checked," he said. "Nobody checked," Hank confirmed. "No welfare call, no school notification, no missing persons report filed by the foster agency. The caseworker's caseload is listed at 62 active placements." He paused again. "She was just gone, Walt. System didn't notice." Walt stood in the fluorescent corridor of St. Catherine's Hospital at 2:47 in the morning and was silent for a long time. "What else?" he said. Hank cleared his throat. "I've got 2 prior complaints filed against Pruitt with Sacramento CPS. Both were flagged as unsubstantiated. One from a neighbor in 2018, one from a previous foster child who aged out of the system in 2019 and filed a complaint 6 months after she turned 18. He paused. The 2019 complaint has 40 pages of documentation attached to it. Medical records, photographs of written statement, flagged unsubstantiated, filed in a drawer. Walt said nothing. "There's more," Hank said. "But I need another day to run it down properly." "Run it down," Walt said. "All of it. I need it clean and documented, and I need it in the hands of an attorney by Friday." He went back into the room and sat down in the chair and looked at the sleeping girl and thought about 45 pages of documentation sitting in a drawer in Sacramento in a system that had been depositing $1,400 a month into a man's bank account for 3 weeks after that man's ward had run from his house in the middle of the night and disappeared. He sat there until the sky outside the window began to pale. At 6:15 in the morning, Boulder arrived. His real name was Marcus Webb, but nobody had called him that since approximately 1995. He was 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighed 310 pounds, and he had a face that looked like it had been assembled from separate components by someone working from a rough description. He came through the hospital parking lot on a custom road glide that looked by comparison like a bicycle, and when he climbed off it, several people in the parking lot stopped what they were doing and stared. He was not the first to arrive. The first had come at midnight, 3 more from the San Bernardino charter who had been at a rally in Laughlin and had ridden straight through when Slab's call reached them. Then 2 nomads just after 1 in the morning, road-worn and uncomplaining, who had parked and taken up positions near the hospital entrance without being asked. Then more and more after that, and by the time the desert sky was going pink at 4 in the morning, the parking lot of St. Catherine's Hospital had 37 motorcycles in it, and the number was still growing. By 6:15, when Boulder arrived, there were 81. By 7:30, there were over 200. They came from the Vegas charter and the Purdue charter and charters from Phoenix and Tucson and Reno. They came because Walt Briggs had put out a word that Walt Briggs did not put out lightly, and the weight of that word carried a specific gravity in certain communities. But they also came because the story had gotten out the way stories get out in the age of phones and social media, and the story was specific and it was clear. And it was the kind of story that produces in certain kinds of men a very particular and very focused response. A 16-year-old girl had gone under a burning van for a stranger. She had scars on her back that she had not put there herself. The state of California was coming in the morning to return her to the man who had. The Mongols arrived at 7:45, not many seven riders their California patch visible as they came through the lot entrance. There was a brief stillness among the Hells Angels already assembled there, the reflexive tension of territorial proximity, and then Slab walked out to meet them, and there was a conversation of approximately 90 seconds, and then they parked. The Banditos came at 8:12 of them, Texas plates and desert dust in the red and gold patch that under ordinary circumstances would have required an entirely different kind of response from the men already in the lot. Slab walked out again. By 8:30, there were the Outlaws. By 8:45, a group of independent riders who had no patch at all but had seen something on their phones and ridden through the night from Henderson and Boulder City and Pahrump because the story did not require a patch. At 9 o'clock, as best anyone counted afterward, there were 802 motorcycles in and around the parking lot of St. Catherine's Hospital in Las Vegas, Nevada. They were not making noise. That was the thing that the news cameras arriving in their white vans at 8:40 and setting up on the ridge above the parking lot struggled to convey in their initial reports. 800 men in leather representing clubs that had been at war with each other for decades, standing in a hospital parking lot in the early Nevada morning. And they were quiet. Not the quiet of people waiting for permission. The quiet of people who have already decided. Remy heard it from her room on the third floor. Not the bikes because the bikes were still. The absence of ordinary sound. The parking lot sounds that had filtered up through her window all night. The occasional engine, the voices. The normal ambient texture of a working hospital exterior. All of it had been replaced by something different. A presence, the particular quality of silence that a large number of people produce when they are all pointed in the same direction and none of them are speaking. She pushed herself up on her right arm, slowly careful of the immobilized shoulder, and got herself to the window. She looked down. She stood at the window for a long time. She had no framework for what she was seeing. Nothing in 10 years of the foster system. Nothing in 16 years of a life that had been lived at close quarters with the worst tendencies of human institutions had given her a category for 800 men standing in a parking lot at 9 in the morning in complete silence, because a girl they had never met was handcuffed to a bed 3 floors above them. She looked at it and felt something move in her chest that was not pain and was not the shoulder and was not anything she had a name for. The black sedan arrived at 9:15. It pulled up to the hospital's main entrance, and Agent Patricia Doreen Halkett stepped out with the particular bearing of a woman who has been doing a difficult job for 20 years and has developed certainty as a professional tool. She was followed by 4 officers from the Nevada Highway Patrol requested as escort, and 2 Sacramento County Sheriff's deputies who had flown in with her as the California Transport Detail. She looked at the parking lot. To her credit, she did not stop walking. She adjusted her grip on her document case and she kept moving toward the entrance. And she was 10 feet from the door when Boulder stepped in front of it. He did not say anything. He folded his arms across his chest and looked at a point approximately 6 inches above Halkett's head and did not move. Agent Halkett looked up at him. "Step aside," she said. "I have a federal court order." Boulder continued to look at the point 6 inches above her head. She turned to the Nevada Highway Patrol lieutenant beside her. "Remove this man," she said. The lieutenant was named Gaffney, and he had been a cop for 18 years, and he looked at Boulder, and then he turned and looked at the 800 men behind Boulder, and he looked back at Halkett. "With all due respect, Agent Halkett," he said, "I don't have enough personnel to execute that order safely in this environment." "Then call the National Guard." "Ma'am," Gaffney said carefully, "I'm not calling the National Guard to a hospital parking lot in Las Vegas on live television." She had not fully processed the television part. She turned and looked at the ridge above the lot. 4 news vans, cameras, the red light of live transmission. She turned back to the entrance. The crowd parted. Walt Briggs walked through the gap between 800 men, with the unhurried authority of someone who has never needed a crowd to make a point, but accepts the assistance graciously when it is offered. He stopped in front of Halkett. He was carrying a cup of coffee from the hospital cafeteria. He looked rested, which he was not. "You're not taking her," he said. "Mr. Briggs." Halkett's voice had the practiced neutrality of a professional who has dealt with hostile parties for 2 decades. "I understand your emotional investment in this situation, but Jackson Remy Cole is a ward of the California foster system, and she is subject to a court order requiring her return to her designated placement." Her designated placement, Walt said, broke her ribs. Her designated placement put cigarette burns on her lower back. He paused. "You want to tell me what paragraph of the California foster care regulations covers returning a child to a man who has been using her as a punching bag for 2 years while collecting $1,400 a month to provide her with a safe environment? Those allegations are unsubstantiated. One of them is 45 pages long, and it's been sitting in a drawer in your Sacramento office since 2019. Halkett was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what you think you know about our internal files," she said. "I know enough," Walt said, "and by Friday morning, a judge is going to know the same things. This is not a negotiation," Halkett said. "I have a court order. That girl is coming with me." "Then arrest me for obstruction," Walt said. He raised his voice not for Halkett, but for the cameras on the ridge. "Arrest all of us. That ought to look real good on the morning news. 800 men blocking the exit of a hospital to protect a 16-year-old girl who went under a burning van to save a stranger. You load her into that transport van on live television, and everybody in America is going to watch you do it." Halkett's phone rang. She looked at the screen. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, which was the only sign she gave of what the call was going to cost her. She answered it and said her name, and then she listened, and her face did what faces do when a decision is being made above your level and handed down to you as an instruction. She listened for 40 seconds. "Stand down," she said quietly into the phone. "Yes, sir. Understood." She lowered the phone. She looked at Walt with the specific expression of someone filing away a debt for future collection. "This isn't finished, Briggs." "I know," he said. "We'll finish it in court." She signaled to the officers and the transport deputies, and they walked back to their vehicles, and the black sedan left the parking lot, and the transport vans turned around, and the cheer that went up from 800 men was the kind of sound that does not dissipate quickly in an open desert environment. It rolled out across the parking lot and up the ridge past the news vans and out into the morning air of Las Vegas, and it went up to the 3rd floor of St. Catherine's Hospital, where a 16-year-old girl was standing at a window watching it happen. She put her right hand flat against the glass. Walt came back through the lobby and took the elevator to the 3rd floor and walked down the corridor past the 2 highway patrol officers who had been standing there all night and who had the look of men who were reconsidering certain career decisions. He pushed open the door of room 314. Remy was still at the window. She turned when she heard the door. He crossed to the bed rail. He reached into his vest pocket and produced a small key, the kind that comes with standard law enforcement cuffs. When someone who is not a law enforcement officer has persuaded a law enforcement officer to hand them over as a gesture of professional courtesy. He unlocked the cuff and it fell away from the rail with a small metallic sound, and he dropped the whole apparatus into the trash can beside the bed. He stood back. She rubbed her wrist where the metal had been. "What happens now?" she said. He pulled the chair from the corner and set it beside the bed and sat down. He was quiet for a moment, the way he was always quiet before he said something that mattered. "Now I call an attorney in Los Angeles named Stellan Voss," he said. "And Voss files an emancipation petition and an adoption petition simultaneously, because I've been doing this long enough to know you never put all your chips on one number." She looked at him. "Why?" she said. He had been waiting for the question. He had been thinking about how to answer it since 2:47 in the morning, when Hank had told him about the drawer in Sacramento and the 45 pages that nobody had acted on. "Because the system had you for 10 years, he said, "and the system is still taking money from a man who beat you. And that means the system is not going to fix this from the inside." He paused. "And because Sadie is alive." "That's not a reason for the adoption part," Remy said. He looked at her for a moment. "No," he said. "The adoption part is because I sat in this chair all night watching you sleep and thinking about a kid in Flagstaff who figured out which direction to run if things went wrong, and nobody gave that kid a reason not to run for the next 40 years, and I'm not making that same mistake twice. The room was quiet. A knock at the door, soft, tentative. It was not the knock of a law enforcement officer. "Come in," Walt said. The door opened and Sadie came through it in a wheelchair, pushed by a nurse, her left leg in an external fixator, her right arm in a sling, her blonde hair pulled back and a bandage taped above her left eye. She looked like she had recently survived something significant, which she had. She also looked like the person in the photograph on the inside of her father's windshield, the unguarded happiness, slightly battered, but fundamentally intact. She looked at Remy. Remy looked at her. They had held hands in the dark under a burning van. They had done that before they had exchanged names. The ordinary sequence of human acquaintance did not apply here, and both of them understood it. The nurse wheeled Sadie to the bedside and stepped back. Sadie reached out with her uninjured hand. Remy looked at it for a moment and then took it. "Thank you is not enough," Sadie said. "I know that." "You don't owe me anything," Remy said. Sadie shook her head. The nurse moved discreetly toward the door and stepped out. "I was conscious for most of it," Sadie said. "I heard the sirens. I heard the police. I know you could have run." She paused. "Why didn't you?" Remy was quiet for a moment. "You said 4 words," she said. Sadie looked at her. "Please don't leave me," Remy said. "You said it, and I couldn't leave." She paused. "Nobody ever stayed when I said that. I didn't want you to be me." The room was very quiet. Sadie's hand tightened on hers. "I'm not going anywhere," Sadie said. "For whatever that's worth, coming from someone in a wheelchair who can't go very far anyway." Remy did not laugh, but something in her face changed, some small tightening around the eyes that was not pain, a thing that in other circumstances and with more practice might eventually become the beginning of a smile. Walt watched his daughter hold the hand of the girl who had saved her life, and he thought about 45 pages in a drawer, and $1,400 a month, and a 6-year-old in a motel hallway, and he thought about what the law was built to do and what it actually did, and he thought about Stellan Voss in Los Angeles, who charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent of it. He thought about the patch still sitting on the bed rail. Remy followed his eyes to it. She picked it up with her right hand and turned it over once. "I need to tell you something," Walt said. "The patch is symbolic right now. You're a ward of the state, and you're 16, and I'm not going to pretend the club can formally make you anything while the legal situation is what it is." He paused. "But I wanted you to have it so you'd know the vote already happened. Unanimous." He looked at her. "Whatever comes next, however long it takes, that vote is already in." Remy looked at the patch for a long time. She turned it over again. She set it on the blanket next to her hand, close, but not gripped the way you set something down when you're not ready to fully claim it, but you're not ready to push it away either. Outside in the parking lot, engines were beginning to start. 800 men who had ridden through the night from across the Southwest were beginning the process of returning to wherever they had come from, their presence having been required and their presence having been provided, and the rest of it being a matter for lawyers and courtrooms and the slower machinery of the system that did not move at the speed of 800 motorcycles but could, if worked correctly, be made to move in the right direction. The sound came up through the window, that low gathering rumble that Remy had heard first on a highway shoulder outside a gas station in the Mojave, and she turned her head toward the window and listened to it. It was nothing like the sound of sirens. It did not have the same quality in the chest. Sirens contracted everything, made the body small and the options smaller. This sound did something different, something she did not yet have language for, something that had to do with the specific difference between a sound that is hunting you and a sound that is standing between you and the thing that hunts. Sadie was still holding her hand. Walt was sitting in the chair, both feet flat on the floor, unhurried, in no apparent need of anywhere else to be. The engines faded slowly as the riders departed one by one, and in groups back onto the streets of Las Vegas, and then the highways that would take them north and south and east and west across the desert. But not all of them. Some stayed. Slab stayed. Boulder stayed. 6 others from the San Bernardino charter stayed. They would be in the parking lot when Dale Pruitt's flight landed at McCarran Airport at 11:40 that morning, and they would be in the parking lot when the Nevada CPS supervisor called Agent Halkett and told her to stand down from the airport pickup because the situation was under active legal review, and they would be in the parking lot through the afternoon and into the evening and through the following night. They would be there when Stellan Voss filed the simultaneous petitions in Clark County Family Court 2 days later, they would be there for the duration. Remy did not know any of this yet. She knew the handcuff was gone. She knew the sound of 800 engines had replaced the sound of sirens in some fundamental rearrangement of her internal landscape. She knew that a 19-year-old girl she had met while lying on burning asphalt was holding her hand in a hospital room in Las Vegas and did not appear to be letting go. She looked at the patch on the blanket beside her hand. After a while, she picked it up and held it. She did not say anything, but she held it, and Walt saw that she was holding it, and he did not say anything either, because some things do not require words, and both of them knew it. Outside, the last of the 800 engines faded into the desert morning. The parking lot was quiet. The battle for Remy Cole had moved off the asphalt and into the courtroom, and it was going to be slow, and it was going to be ugly, and the system was going to fight it because systems fight anything that reveals how badly they have failed. But she was not handcuffed to the bed anymore, and she was not alone. The group home was called Sunrise House. It was a single-story building on a quiet street in Henderson, Nevada, 12 miles from the hospital where Remy had woken up with her wrist cuffed to a rail and 800 engines rumbling 3 floors below her. It had beige walls, an indoor-outdoor carpet, and a common room with a television that got 11 channels, and a backyard with a chain-link fence that nobody had painted in recent memory. It housed 8 girls between the ages of 13 and 17, staffed by rotating shifts of county employees who were competent and tired in roughly equal measure. It was not a bad place. That was the honest assessment, and Remy was committed to honest assessments because dishonest ones got people killed. The staff did not raise their voices. The deadbolt was on the outside of the building's front door, not the bedroom doors. Nobody had a belt with a brass buckle hanging on a hook by the bathroom. By the metrics that mattered to Remy, Cole Sunrise House registered as acceptable. It was not home. She did not know what home was exactly. She had a theoretical understanding of it, the way you have a theoretical understanding of a country you have never visited but have read about in books. She knew its general coordinates. She could describe its features from other people's accounts. She had seen it through the window of Walt Briggs's expression when he looked at a photograph clipped to his windshield in a gas station parking lot in the Mojave Desert. She had not been inside it yet. The court had mandated a separation period as a condition of the active proceedings, a cooling-off measure designed to ensure that Remy's preferences were not unduly influenced by ongoing contact with the petitioning party, which was the legal system's way of saying that the judge wanted to know whether a 16-year-old girl genuinely wanted to be adopted by a Hell's Angel, or whether she had been convinced of this in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic event by a very large man with considerable force of personality. It was a reasonable concern expressed in the language of bureaucracy, and it meant that Remy could not see Walt Briggs for the duration of the preliminary proceedings. The duration turned out to be 6 months. She marked them. Not with a calendar, she had not wanted to give the situation that much formal acknowledgement, but in the way time marks itself in a person who is waiting. The Henderson summer gave way to a Nevada fall that was less a season than a slight moderation of the heat, and then a winter that surprised her with its cold, the desert at night dropping to temperatures that had nothing to do with the landscape's daytime personality. She got her GED study materials from the Henderson Public Library, and she worked through them on the folding table in the corner of the room she shared with a 15-year-old named Brianna, who slept with the light on and did not explain why and did not need to. She studied in the mornings and thought in the afternoons and lay awake in the nights. The thinking was different now. That was the thing she noticed most. The quality of her own thoughts had changed in some fundamental way that she could not entirely account for. For 2 years in Dale Pruitt's house, her thinking had been almost exclusively tactical. Where is the exit? What is the mood in the room? What is the safest position? How long until morning? The future had not existed as a concept she applied to herself in any meaningful way, because the future required a baseline assumption of continuity that her circumstances had made unreliable. You do not plan for a future you are not sure you are going to reach. Something had shifted. She was still tactical. She did not think that was going to change, and she did not particularly want it to. The ability to read a room and assess a situation and know where the exits were had kept her alive, and she had no interest in trading it away for naivety. But the tactics were no longer the only content of her mind. She found herself thinking about the restaurant Sadie had mentioned casually in the wreckage of a burning car and wondering whether she had meant an Italian or something more specific. She found herself working through the GED math problems, not as a means to an end, but because the problems had a satisfying internal logic that she respected. She found herself on 2 occasions writing in a notebook she had bought at the Henderson Walgreens. Not plans and not lists, but actual sentences, paragraphs, the record of a person who has begun to believe that their experience is worth the space it takes up on a page. She had not told anyone about the notebook. But every morning without fail, she went to the window of the room she shared with Brianna and looked out at the street. Every morning there was a motorcycle parked across the street. Not always the same bike. Some days it was Slab's Road King Burgundy with chrome pipes always clean regardless of what the roads had been like. Some days it was a blue Electra Glide she did not recognize belonging to one of the Vegas charter members whose name she did not know. Once it was Boulder's Road Glide, enormous and slightly absurd on the residential street, Boulder himself sitting on it, reading a paperback, with the focused concentration of a man who is not self-conscious about anything he does. They never waved. They never spoke to her through the window or the fence. The conditions of the separation period were being observed with technical precision. They were simply present. On the street, in view of her window, every morning without exception for 6 months. She understood what it meant. Not the surface meaning, which was protection and solidarity, and the physical expression of Walt Briggs's promise made on the asphalt of Interstate 15. She understood the deeper meaning, the one that required no words and could not have been conveyed with them anyway. We see you. We know you are there. We are not going anywhere. She had been invisible for 10 years, not metaphorically invisible, literally overlooked, unmissed a name in a file that nobody opened unless something had gone wrong and it needed to be updated. A 16-year-old girl had disappeared from a licensed foster placement, and the system that was paid to know her whereabouts had not noticed for 3 weeks. A motorcycle was a large and noisy and conspicuous thing to be parked on a Henderson residential street, and whoever was in it could not be missed or overlooked or forgotten by anyone who cared to look. That was the point. She looked out the window every morning, and she did not wave back, and she did not need to. Dale Pruitt was arrested in the parking lot of a Safeway supermarket in Sacramento on a Thursday in October. Remy heard about it from the Sunrise House staff supervisor, a woman named Connie, who delivered the information with the careful neutrality of someone who is not sure how the recipient is going to respond and wants to leave room for any version of it. She sat down across from Remy at the folding table in the common room and said that she had been informed by the Clark County Family Court liaison that Mr. Pruitt had been taken into custody on multiple felony counts, and that this development would be relevant to Remy's upcoming proceedings. Remy looked at her GED study materials. Connie waited. Remy picked up her pencil and made a small mark in the margin of the workbook, not a word or a number, just a mark, a small, deliberate notation that something had been recorded. Then she set the pencil down and looked at Connie. "Thank you for telling me," she said. Connie nodded. She started to say something else, and then stopped. She had worked with foster kids for 11 years, and she had a reasonably accurate sense of the range of responses that a moment like this could produce, everything from tears to rage, to the kind of flat silence that is its own form of collapse. She had not encountered this exact response before, this quiet recording of a fact, this mark in the margin, this thank you that was not performed and not hollow, but simply the response of a person who has already processed the event before it was spoken aloud. She left Remy alone. That night, for the first time in as long as she could remember, Remy Cole slept through until morning. She did not dream about Dale Pruitt's house. She did not dream about the belt or the door with the deadbolt on the outside. She did not lie awake cataloging exits. She closed her eyes in the room with the always-on light because Brianna needed it, and she went somewhere deep and dark and quiet, and she stayed there until the Nevada dawn came through the window and the motorcycle across the street started its engine for the morning shift change, and the sound of it was so familiar by now that it functioned as an alarm clock. She got up. She went to the window. Slab was down there with a cup of coffee. She raised her hand once, a small, flat gesture, palm out, more acknowledgement than wave. He raised his cup once in return and then looked away, and she went to get ready for the day. Stellan Voss arrived in Henderson 3 weeks before the final hearing. He drove a gray Audi and wore suits that communicated a level of professional success that did not require any additional demonstration. He was in his mid-50s with silver gray hair, worn short, and eyes that moved across a room with the comprehensive efficiency of a man who bills by the hour and does not waste any of them. He had been practicing family law in Los Angeles for 27 years, and he had, according to the county records that Remy had found at the library, a winning rate in contested custody and emancipation cases that was high enough to attract the attention of the California Bar Journal on 2 separate occasions. He met with Remy in the Sunrise House conference room, a repurposed bedroom with a round table and 4 chairs, and a window that looked onto the chain-link backyard. He shook her hand with the brisk respect of someone who treats all clients as adults regardless of their age. He laid a folder on the table. "I want to walk you through what happens in the courtroom," he said, "because I don't like surprises and I don't want you to have any." He opened the folder. "There are 2 petitions before the court. The emancipation petition, which asks the judge to declare you a legal adult, freeing you from the foster system entirely, and the adoption petition filed by Mr. Briggs, which asks the court to transfer permanent legal guardianship to him." Remy looked at the documents. "The state is going to oppose both," Voss said. "They're going to argue that emancipation is inappropriate for a minor with no demonstrable means of self-support, and that adoption by Mr. Briggs represents an unsuitable placement given his association with an outlaw motorcycle club." "What do we argue back?" Remy said. Voss looked at her with the expression of someone recalibrating upward. "We argue back with 312 pages of documentation about Dale Pruitt," he said. "We argue back with a psychological evaluation showing you gained 18 pounds and passed a GED practice exam in 6 months in an environment that was moderately supportive." He paused. "We argue back with the fact that you went under a burning vehicle to hold a stranger's hand, which is not the behavior profile of a child who requires more institutional management. It is the behavior profile of someone who already knows who she is." He closed the folder. "And we argue back with Sadie," he said. Remy looked at him. "She submitted a written statement to the court," Voss said. Voluntarily, without being asked, he paused. "I've been doing this for 27 years. Uninstructed character statements from adjacent parties are rare. Effective uninstructed character statements are rarer." He paused again. "I've read a lot of documents. That one is something else." He did not show her the statement. She did not ask to see it. She understood that Sadie had spoken for her in some formal and permanent way, and that the words were part of the record now, part of the machinery that was grinding toward a conclusion in a Clark County courtroom, and she would know what they were when the judge knew what they were, and that felt right to her, felt like the correct sequence. She had one question. "What happens if the judge says no?" she said. Voss looked at her directly. "Then we appeal," he said, "and we keep appealing." He paused. "But I don't think the judge is going to say no." She did not ask him why he thought that. She had the sense that he would tell her what he needed her to know, and that asking for reassurance she had not earned through the evidence was not something either of them wanted from the conversation. She thanked him. He left. She went back to the window. The motorcycle was there. She picked up her notebook and wrote 3 sentences, and then stopped and looked at what she had written and did not cross it out. The morning of the final hearing was cold. December in Henderson was not the same December that happened in places with real winters, but there was a sharpness in the air that required a jacket, and the sky was the pale gray of a day that had not yet decided what it wanted to be. Connie drove Remy to the Clark County Family Court building in downtown Las Vegas in a county vehicle that smelled of air freshener and had a cracked dashboard that rattled at highway speed. They did not talk much on the drive. Connie had asked once if Remy was nervous, and Remy had thought about it honestly and said she was not nervous exactly. Connie had nodded and not pushed it. The courthouse was a concrete building that expressed its authority through size rather than ornamentation. The parking lot held, in addition to the ordinary complement of county vehicles and attorneys' cars, 47 motorcycles arranged in 2 rows near the far end, not 800. The court had issued a specific order about demonstrations in the vicinity of the building. 47 was the number that constituted presence without demonstration, and Remy recognized the precision of it, the exact calibration of a message delivered at the maximum volume the situation permitted. She saw Slab in the 2nd row. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the courthouse entrance with the focused calm of a man who has decided how this day is going to go. She walked into the building. The courtroom was smaller than she had imagined from television. Courtrooms on television communicated importance through scale-high ceilings and wide galleries, and the accumulated weight of institutional gravity. This one was a working room functional and warned the gallery seating 30 people in bench pews that had the particular quality of wood that has absorbed a great many difficult hours. The gallery was full. Walt was in the front row. He was wearing a dark button-down shirt and dark trousers and his good boots, and someone had trimmed his beard, and he looked like himself wearing the most formal version of himself, which was still substantially more present than most people managed under any circumstances. Sadie was beside him, walking now without the wheelchair, but still with a cane, her leg healing along the slower schedule that the orthopedic surgeon had predicted and then been pleasantly surprised by. She was wearing a blue dress, and she looked up when Remy came in, and her face did the thing it did, the unguarded thing, the thing that Remy was still learning to receive without deflecting. Behind Walt and Sadie, filling the remaining gallery seats, were people Remy recognized from the past 6 months in ways that were mostly indirect. The Henderson social worker who had processed her intake at Sunrise House, Connie who had slipped in behind her, 2 women she did not know who Voss had mentioned as character witnesses, former colleagues of Walt's from a legitimate business, a motorcycle repair shop in San Bernardino he had owned for 20 years. The prosecutor was a man named Sterling. He was 50-ish, heavy-set, and had the manner of someone who had argued successfully for institutional positions for long enough that he had confused the institution with justice. He was reviewing papers at the prosecution table with the focused preoccupation of a man who does not look up because looking up would require acknowledging the people in the room as individuals rather than as parties to a proceeding. Voss was already at the defense table, his folder open, his pen moving. He looked up when Remy sat down, gave her a single nod, and returned to his papers. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Harrison entered. He was in his late 60s, a large man who wore his age the way certain men wear it, with the easy authority of someone who stopped caring what people thought of him approximately 15 years ago and found the freedom of it entirely agreeable. He had a face that looked as if it had been present at a considerable number of human difficulties without being destroyed by them, which was the specific qualification the situation required. He sat. He looked at the room over the top of his glasses. He looked at Remy. She looked back at him. He nodded once, the infinitesimal acknowledgement of someone noting that a person is present and awake, and opened the file in front of him. The proceeding began. Sterling went first, and he was good at what he did in the way that people are good at things they have practiced without examining. He laid out the state's position with the fluency of someone who has made the same argument many times. The petitioner, Walter Briggs, was a senior officer in an organization with a documented history of criminal activity. The environment of an outlaw motorcycle club was demonstrably unsuitable for a minor, particularly a minor with Remy Cole's documented history of instability and flight risk. The appropriate placement was a structured, therapeutic environment until the minor reached the age of majority, at which point she would be equipped with the skills necessary for independent functioning. He said the words documented instability twice and flight risk 3 times. He did not say anything about Dale Pruitt. Voss waited until Sterling finished, and then he stood, and he did not raise his voice, and he did not perform outrage, because Voss had been doing this long enough to know that outrage was a tool with a short effective range, and he had something better. He presented the 312 pages. He did not read all of them. He did not need to. He summarized the structure of what they contained. The 2 prior complaints, the 45-page filing from 2019 that had been marked unsubstantiated without investigation, the PI's documentation of the pattern of abuse across 10 years, the medical records, the neighbor testimony, the security camera audio. He presented the financial records showing Dale Pruitt collecting $1,460 monthly for 3 weeks after his ward had fled the placement in the middle of the night. He presented the psychological evaluation. He read 3 sentences from it aloud. The subject demonstrates marked improvement in all assessed stress indicators over the observation period. She has developed consistent academic habits and shows strong intrinsic motivation. Most significantly, for the first time in the clinical record, the subject speaks of her future in specific terms rather than as an abstraction. He paused. She speaks of her future in specific terms, he repeated. After 10 years in this system, after Dale Pruitt, after everything this court can read in those 312 pages, She started talking about her future. He let that sit in the air for a moment. I would submit to the court that the system's track record with this child is not a credential that entitles it to continued authority over her life. Sterling objected twice during Voss's presentation and was overruled both times. Then Remy stood. She had not prepared remarks in the formal sense. Voss had advised against it. Prepared remarks in cases like this one, he had said, often sounded prepared, and sounding prepared when you are 16 and before a family court judge on the question of your own future carries a risk of seeming coached, and seeming coached was a gift to Sterling that they did not need to provide. He had told her to say what was true and to say it in as few words as possible. She stood at the small podium and looked at Judge Harrison. She did not look at Sterling. She did not look at Walt, because if she looked at Walt, she would need to look away, and looking away in a courtroom felt like a thing she was not willing to do. "Your Honor," she said, "I'm not going to tell you I had a hard life because I think you've read the file and you already know what's in it." She paused. "I'm not going to ask you to feel sorry for me." "I don't feel sorry for me," she paused again. "What I want to say is this. I made one decision in my life that was purely mine, not the system's and not Dale Pruitt's and not anyone else's. I got under that van because a girl needed somebody to stay. And Walt Briggs sat in a hospital chair all night because he needed to make sure I was all right." She looked at the judge steadily. "I've been in 7 placements, and I know the difference between people who are required to be present and people who choose to be." She stopped. "I don't need perfect. I just need to not be afraid to sleep." She sat down. The courtroom was quiet. Voss made 2 final arguments. Sterling made a rebuttal that was shorter than his opening, which was the tell of a man who feels the room moving against him. Harrison listened to both with the expression of someone who has already read the ending, but is obligated to sit through the full text. Then Harrison looked at his file. He was quiet for what felt like a very long time. The courtroom held its breath in the particular way that rooms hold breath, before significant things, a collective physiological response to shared stakes. Harrison looked up. "Miss Cole," he said, "the court has carefully considered the petition for emancipation filed on your behalf." She sat still. "This petition asked the court to declare you a legal adult at the age of 16, releasing you from the oversight of the California foster system and granting you full autonomy over your own affairs." He paused. "After review of all submitted materials and consideration of the applicable statutes, the court finds that while the circumstances of your case are extraordinary, the emancipation standard requires demonstrable capacity for self-support that the record does not yet establish." He took off his glasses. "The petition for emancipation is denied." The sound that moved through the gallery was not loud. It was a collective intake of breath, the sound of 30 people adjusting to an outcome they had hoped would be different. Walt's jaw tightened. Sadie's hand found his arm. Voss sat perfectly still. Remy looked at the judge and did not look away. Harrison held up one hand. "The court simultaneously considers a secondary petition," he said. His voice had changed by a degree that was not about volume. Something in it had settled the way a room settles when the last person has taken their seat and the thing that everyone came for is about to begin. A petition for adoption filed by Mr. Walter Briggs of San Bernardino, California. Walt was not moving. He was not breathing in any way that was visible from across the room. Harrison opened a different section of the file. "The state has argued that Mr. Briggs's background renders him an unsuitable adoptive parent. The court has weighed this argument carefully. Mr. Briggs's record contains 3 arrests, the most recent of which is 19 years old, and no convictions beyond a 1998 misdemeanor. He has owned and operated a licensed business for 20 years. He has raised 1 child, his daughter Sadie, who by any measure that matters, appears to have grown into a person of considerable character." He paused. "The court has received a voluntary statement from Sadie Briggs submitted without instruction from any party to these proceedings." He looked down at the paper in front of him. "I am going to read one passage from this statement," he said, "because I believe it is dispositive." He found the line. "Miss Briggs writes, I watched a girl I had never met go under a burning van and stay there because she would not leave me alone. She had every reason to run. She had a warrant and no one looking out for her, and a life that had given her nothing but reasons not to trust. She stayed anyway. Whatever the law says about who deserves a family, I know what I saw. She already knows how to be one." Harrison set the paper down. He let the sentence sit in the air of the courtroom until it had fully arrived. The law exists, he said, to serve a purpose. That purpose is the protection and well-being of the people who come before it. He looked at Remy, not the management of their inconvenience to the system, not the perpetuation of arrangements that have already failed them by every available measure. He paused. The record before this court does not describe a child who needs more institutional oversight. It describes a child who has survived a decade of institutional failure and emerged from it with a clarity of character that most people do not achieve in a lifetime. He picked up his gavel. The petition for adoption of Remy Cole by Walter Briggs is granted effective immediately and with full legal force. He paused. The court further notes for the record that the California foster care system's handling of this case will be referred to the State Oversight Board for review. He looked at Sterling. The drawer in Sacramento is going to be opened. He brought the gavel down. The sound it made was not large. Gavels in working courtrooms are not ceremonial objects. They are tools, and the sound they make is modest and wooden and final. What happened in the gallery was not modest. The 30 people in the pew seats produced a sound that was larger than 30 people should have been able to produce, and it came out of the building and reached the parking lot where 47 motorcycle riders heard it through the courthouse walls and understood, without needing to be told, what it meant, and the sound that 47 motorcycle engines make when they are started simultaneously in a parking lot in Henderson, Nevada, carries for a considerable distance in the cold December air. Remy was still sitting at the defense table. She was looking at her hands, the bandages long since gone, the palms healed to new pink skin that would eventually fade to something close to what had been there before. She heard the gavel. She heard the gallery. She heard distantly the engines in the parking lot. She sat there for a moment and did not move. Voss placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, a single touch, professional and warm, and then began gathering his papers. She heard Walt come through the gate in the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. She heard his boots on the floor, the familiar, deliberate weight of them. She looked up. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the hospital room, the way he had looked at her from the chair in the corner with the dried blood under his fingernails, the way he had looked at her every single time she had been looked at by this man, which was as if she was entirely visible and entirely worth the looking. He held out his hand. She took it and stood. He did not pull her into anything. He waited. And she was the one who stepped forward, and she was the one who closed the distance, and she put her forehead against his chest for a moment. Just that, just the contact, just the specific physical fact of a person choosing to be close to another person without bracing for what comes next. He put one large hand on the back of her head, gentle, in the way that very strong people can be gentle when they choose to be. "Welcome home," he said. 2 words. The right 2 words, the only 2 words. She did not cry. She was not ready for crying yet. Not the good kind, not the kind that comes from relief rather than fear. That would come later in a parking lot in San Bernardino on a Tuesday evening in February when she was moving her 2 bags of belongings into the room that Walt had prepared for her with the same methodical care he brought to everything, and she opened the closet and found it empty, but for 3 things: a hanger, a shelf, and on the shelf a framed photograph. It was the same photograph from Walt's windshield. The square one, the real camera kind. Sadie in it, unguarded and happy, but it had been reprinted, enlarged. And next to Sadie, added with the careful digital work of someone who had found a hospital photograph from the news coverage and spent some time with it, was Remy. 17 years old, thin eyes, still carrying their habitual caution, but present, in the frame, beside Sadie. Walt had put it there before she arrived. She stood in the closet doorway and looked at the photograph for a long time, and then she sat down on the floor of the closet and put her face in her hands and cried for approximately 10 minutes with the thorough unself-consciousness of someone who has been given the privacy to do it and the safety to mean it. Then she washed her face and unpacked her 2 bags and went downstairs, where Walt had made coffee and Sadie had driven up from Arizona for the weekend, and the 3 of them sat at a kitchen table in San Bernardino and did not talk about anything important at all, which was itself the most important thing. 3 years is not a long time in the span of a life. It is not enough time to undo a decade. It is not enough time to make the exit stop appearing in a room when you walk into it, or to make the flinch response to unexpected loud sounds fully retrain itself, or to make 10 years of institutional invisibility feel like something that happened to someone else. But it is enough time. It is enough time to learn that a kitchen can smell like coffee without anything bad happening afterward. It is enough time to fill a notebook and start a second one. It is enough time to pass a GED exam with scores that made the testing administrator double-check the registration to confirm the test taker's age. It is enough time to decide that the restaurant Sadie wants to open should specialize in wood-fired cooking, and that the business plan they have been writing on Sunday afternoons at the kitchen table in San Bernardino has a reasonable chance of working if they are willing to start small. It is enough time just barely to start believing that the future is a place you are actually going. The morning of the 3-year mark fell on a Saturday in July, which meant the temperature on Interstate 15 near the Mojave National Preserve was approximately what it had been on the day Remy Cole had walked that same highway with $19 in her shoe and a warrant in the Nevada system and a plan to disappear in Las Vegas. She did not walk it this time. She rode. Walt had taught her on a small Sportster in a parking lot in San Bernardino over a series of Saturday mornings that had begun in the spring of her first full year and had progressed with the methodical patience that characterized everything Walt did. He did not praise her extravagantly when she got something right, which she respected. He did not express frustration when she got something wrong, which she also respected, because frustration expressed physically was a thing she was still recalibrating, and his steady absence of it was doing work she could not fully quantify. By the following spring, she had her license. By summer, she had her own bike, a matte black Sportster that Walt had sourced through the club, and that Slab had spent 3 weekends in the shop bringing to a standard that satisfied him, which was a high standard. On the front of the leather vest she had received at the end of her first year as a prospect over the left breast was the patch that the table had voted on unanimously. A white van broken in half. She had looked at it for a long time when Walt presented it. She had thought about the heat and the weight and the smell of gasoline and the hand she had held in the dark, and she had thought about 4 words said in a motel hallway that nobody had answered, and she had thought about sitting on the floor of a closet in San Bernardino, crying in the particular way that only safety makes possible. She had put the vest on. Now the 3 of them moved down the center lane of Interstate 15 in the July morning, the formation they had taken on every long ride of the past 2 years. Walt on his Road King to her left, steady and unhurried. Sadie to her right in the red convertible she had bought with the first real money from the restaurant, consulting work she had started doing while the larger project took shape. Her hair in the wind, laughing at something she was not going to be able to communicate over the engine noise and not trying to. Remy rode the center. She had thought she might feel something specific when the mile marker came into view. She had thought there might be a tremor of something, the residue of memory working its way to the surface in the presence of the location that had produced it. She had told herself this was likely and had prepared for it in the way she prepared for things by acknowledging its possibility in advance so that it could not arrive as a surprise. What she felt was not what she had prepared for. The mile marker appeared ahead, and she saw it coming, and she saw the patch of new asphalt that covered the place where the van had burned 3 years before. For a slightly darker rectangle in the road surface, and she felt something in her chest that was not pain and not grief and not the cold clinical detachment of a person refusing to engage. It was recognition. The recognition of a place that had asked something significant of her and received it in the quiet satisfaction of a person who, looking back at the cost of that transaction, finds that she does not regret it. She had paid for this in ways that could not be fully itemized. She had paid in a fractured shoulder that still ached on cold mornings, and in the months at Sunrise House, and in everything that came before the highway, all the years of it, all the doors and all the deadbolts and all the brass buckles and all the silences that answered nothing. She had paid and she had received. She did not slow down at the mile marker. She leaned slightly into the throttle, the bike lifting its voice for a moment, and then she was past it, and the road stretched out ahead, 4 lanes of Interstate 15 going east into the Nevada morning, and the desert on both sides was doing what the desert did, existing with the absolute indifference of something that does not need your presence and does not mourn your absence, and will be precisely what it is long after everyone driving through it has become a different version of themselves. Walt matched her speed on the left. She could see his hands on the Road King's grips in her peripheral vision, easy and familiar. Sadie's convertible kept pace on the right, the radio audible between the engines. Remy Briggs rode the center lane of Interstate 15 at 70 miles per hour in the July heat, the broken van patch over her heart and the mile marker shrinking in her mirrors. And she thought about a 16-year-old girl who had walked this same asphalt with $19 and a plan to disappear, and she understood with the completeness of 3 years of evidence that the girl had not disappeared. She had arrived. The road ahead was wide and the morning was clear and the desert went on for a long distance in every direction, which was not a threat. It was a fact. And facts Remy had learned were not the same as conclusions. A fact was just what was true right now. Conclusions were made by people who confused the present for the permanent, who looked at a girl sitting behind a dumpster with $19 and a warrant and decided they already knew how the story ended. They had been wrong. She had been wrong about herself too for a while. She had been wrong about what she deserved and wrong about what was possible and wrong about whether the word home was a place that had room for a person like her. She was not wrong about those things anymore. She twisted the throttle and the Sportster surged and the wind was enormous and the desert opened up on both sides and the road went on ahead for as far as she could see, which was far, which was exactly as far as it needed to be.